Hello, everyone. This is Betsy Wurzel. You're a host of Chatting with Betsy on Passionate Rural Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Our mantra is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. The views of the guest may not represent those of the host of the station. Folks, I am so excited. I always say when I do my show. With me today is Dr. Bobby Hoffman, who is the author of The Paradox of Passion, How Rewards Covertly Control Motivation. Dr. Hoffman is an associate professor, researcher, and author who specializes in motivation science and solving the mysteries of human behavior. At the University of Central Florida, he teaches a variety of graduate-level courses in motivation, learning, cognition, and intelligence. Before earning his Ph.D. in educational psychology, 2006, he worked for over 20 years in human resources management and performance consulting for some of the world's most successful companies, including General Electric, NBC, KBMG, and the NBA. He has authored over 100 publications in the field of education, psychology, neuroscience, leadership, and organizational development. In addition, Dr. Hoffman is a regular contributor to the Psychology Today website, where his blog, Motivate, has been downloaded by over 1.2 million readers. He serves on 6 journal editorial boards, including Contemporary Educational Psychology, Educational Psychology Review, and Educational Technology Research and Development. He also has other books, Hack Your Motivation and Motivation for Learning and Performance. And there's so much more to say about Dr. Bobby Hoffman, so I highly recommend you go on his website, which we will give. And I want to welcome Dr. Bobby Hoffman to Chatting with Betsy.
Good afternoon, Betsy. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
I'm ready to enlighten and entertain.
Well, you are entertaining, Dr. Hoffman. I've heard you on other podcasts. I found you very entertaining and educational. I'm going to thank you for coming on and spending time with me today, and good afternoon to you. And I want to, I always ask the authors, what motivated you to write your book?
Well, in this case, that question is probably more relevant than any other. And my motivation is I guess, at least threefold. Number one, throughout my entire experience, I've always wondered why people are doing what they're doing. And a lot of times their behaviors don't seem to match what they say or the culture of the companies that they work in. And they demonstrate these behaviors that are really hard to figure out because they go against the grain of what we know about the science of motivation. But more importantly, my goal is to ultimately improve people's lives, because unfortunately in the field of psychology, and especially in motivation, there's a lot of information out there that is not really grounded in evidence. And what that means in very simple terms, we have a lot of so-called experts out there, and they are very successful in their lives, and they're very charismatic, and most of them are very good writers. But they don't have knowledge of motivation science. So when they espouse views about motivation and they offer strategies to help people, they're really telling people to be like me and do what I do and what's made me successful. But since we're all very unique individuals with unique genetic profiles and unique ways of being brought up by our parents and within our particular cultures, the strategies that make one person successful don't always make someone else successful. So what happens is there's a lot of bad information out there, and people cannot really determine or decipher the good information from the bad information. And what winds up happening when you follow the advice of something that's not really grounded in science, you can wind up encountering obstacles and using strategies that you're not prepared to deal with. So that's two reasons. But the third reason, and ultimately as a professor, I work for my students. And I found over the years that many of them, after taking my motivation course, would come to this conclusion that they're not motivated sheerly by passion or the pleasure that comes with completing a goal or a task. And when we're intrinsically motivated, we pursue a task just because it feels good, because we're excited about it, and we're passionate about it. But what my students told me was, well, you know what? After taking your course, I realized that's not what motivates me. So that's why the paradox developed basically for my students, and that paradox means that we think we are often motivated by some things, but in reality and according to science, we may be mislabeling that feeling and be motivated by something else.
That is interesting. I know what I also find interesting, Dr. Hoffman, is the cover of your book. Book covers interest me. I have a thing for book covers. And I have to ask you, I was, looking at it and observing it, and this might sound like an off-the-wall question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there a particular reason why you have one figure in, I would say it's like a bluish green, and one in red, but with different signs going out of their head?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the icons that you see on the cover of the book really represent different types of motivations. And one of the major misconceptions in the field of motivation, and you could probably relate to this based upon your worldly experiences, people don't necessarily know what motivates them. And I go through this activity when I do my face-to-face classes, or when I do a seminar or a keynote speech. And, I'll say to somebody, so what motivated you to be here today? And they'll say something like, well, I want to learn more about the topic. And then I'll dig deeper and I'll say, well, why do you want to learn about the topic? And they'll say, well, I think it would help me on my job. And then I'll say, okay, well, so why is that important? And I keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper below the surface. And ultimately, our motivations are sparked by what's happening inside our head, otherwise known as our brain and our neurological system. So the cover has that representation of that as well. And the two profiles that are on the cover really represent the paradox, because given a particular task, let's say taking a course in motivation, we may start out as one person with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of interest in the particular topic, and we're really curious to learn, but then you take your first exam or you get some feedback from the instructor, and all of a sudden you start focusing on grades, and you might be worried about what other people in the class think about you. So we have these competing interests, and motivation changes all the time, certainly between people, but also within people on the same task. I'm sure, Betsy, sometimes you start things and you're real gung-ho and you want to get to it, and even like reading a book. You start a book and, this is going to be a great book, and then 15 pages through, well, okay, I got to read this because I'm going to have this guy on the show, so I better know what to talk about. That's a completely different motivation, right? And, so that's asking about the cover is actually a really good question, because it represents not only the contents of the book, but what happens in people's heads.
Wow. Well, thank you for answering that. Not thinking I'm off the wall for asking that question, because I was, studying it, and I was like, wow, I have to ask about that. I kind of ask questions that I'm interested in, Dr. Hoffman.
Well, you should. Wait, what? This is all about you, Betsy. It's all about you. And actually, the cover was really important to me because I wanted to portray the right message. And like I said, my ultimate and defining motivation is to improve people's lives. I get very upset when people get information that they consider to be gospel, and that information harms you. And for example, you might say, so what kind of information is that? Well, okay, if we take the passion narrative that is generated almost 100% by many of the people in the media and motivational speakers and a lot of famous authors, the concept in vogue since Dan Pink wrote the book Drive in 2011 has been to be self-determined and live your dream and pursue what makes you happy. That is the current narrative. And so people generally think, well, in order for me to be the complete person and to be successful in my life and feel content and be satisfied as an individual, I must find my passion. But I'll ask you, what happens when that passion goes away? Well, Betsy, I apologize, but I don't know if you have any children, but
yes, I do.
One of the biggest killers, I call it a buzz killer of passion, is postmortem depression. Now, why not postmortem? that was really wrong.
Well, there's that too.
Yeah. Well, of course, we all do that. That was some Freudian slip. I don't know. But postpartum depression, where you have a baby, and all of a sudden you're like, now what? And I'm not trying to mansplain here, but we know generally that when women have a child, the period of time immediately following giving birth, there's this drop in enthusiasm and people are lost. Mm-hmm. Same thing happens at the end of relationships or the end of a job, or even if you watch a really good movie or you read a really good book and it's over, and then you think to yourself, oh, now what? Oh, I wish it didn't end. What am I going to do next? So we get to these motivational lulls, and the passion and enthusiasm that we have drops precipitously, and it takes a deep dive. And you need to have the strategies in place to know what to do about that. But if you're pursuing the passion narrative and you don't have passion, what happens? You may say to yourself, what's wrong with me? Why am I not enthusiastic about my job anymore? Why don't I get excited about my relationship? How come I don't get pleasure from the things that I used to do? And then you start doubting yourself as an individual. And when you doubt yourself as an individual, go ahead.
Yeah, I have to ask you this, Dr. Hoffman, because, and I'm sure you've heard this, and I've heard this. Do you agree or disagree with this philosophy? If you find your purpose, you'll find your passion. You hear that over and over again.
See, this is part of the problem, Betsy, because number one, if you think about just what I just explained, the passion is not sustainable over the long term. So you're going to have situations where motivation has its highs and lows, and when you get to that low point, you might say to yourself, I don't have my passion. I don't know my purpose. That's number one. Number two, your purpose can change over time. Number three, passion and purpose are not built into 90% of the jobs that people have. If you work in a factory, if you work on a farm, if you work in a clerical job, if you work in any type of position that isn't inherently rewarding based upon what you're doing, it's devoid of passion. So you might not find that purpose in your life. So it's an unsustainable narrative. And finally, and this really relates to the chapters in the book after I explain what we've just talked about, but not everybody is rewarded by being excited and enthusiastic about what they do. Some people are very happy with just getting the recognition that they think they deserve. Some people are very satisfied by being known as the big expert in whatever field they do. Other people are satisfied by having a reputation of a certain type or quality, such as being the most friendly person or the most honest person or the most helpful person. There doesn't have to be passion there. Not at all. There doesn't have to be purpose. Your purpose could be having influence on other people because you want your voice to be heard. You don't have to be passionate about it. Maybe you just want those clicks and those likes on social media, or those downloads of your podcast, or the things that you produce or you want to sell. Let's say you're an artist or you're a writer or you're in some sort of a creative field. Your passion may not be in actually performing the task that gets you the recognition or the reward. And all these things I'm describing are ultimately rewards from your brain's perspective. So there are any number of outcomes that people can strive for and be satisfied about that are devoid of passion. So, but
that's interesting.
Saying I don't want to sound like a broken record, but if we rely on passion alone, we're going to get really disappointed because it just doesn't exist all the
time. That's true. I have to ask you this question for me personally. I have to ask you this.
Okay.
When my husband, my late husband, was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's, I was angry, Dr. Hoffman. I was angry at the medical community.
I would be angry too.
For not listening to us. This is 15 years ago when they didn't know back then what they know now. And just the frustration of getting, first being bullied, the diagnosis, and then trying to, caregivers weren't being recognized. And I said, you know what, I can't let this anger consume me. So I turned my anger into a passion. Now, sometimes I get unmotivated, like you were talking about, like you can't sustain it. And, eventually, I went in my car and started doing videos, which was totally not like me, Dr. Hoffman. I don't like being in the spotlight. I'm very shy. Actually, people don't believe that, but I am. And
well, I don't believe it.
But it was this, it was this passion that I had that I wanted people to know about. You can get Alzheimer's at an early age, for people to know what caregivers are going through. And eventually, Jeannie White, who's the station manager of Passion World Talk Radio Network, discovered me, and my show is a passion because I want people to know about resources. I want people to know about you. You're a wonderful resource. And, just to help them have a better life. And so what I'm asking, I guess, is can you change your anger into a passion? Although it may not be sustainable.
Absolutely you can. And that's where the strategy piece comes in. And what you're really describing is how your reward structure in your brain began to focus on different things. And you went through a transition period where you were replacing one reward with another. But before we go any further, I want to just clarify for you and anyone that's listening that having passion is a wonderful thing. If we can find that in any part of our lives, we should certainly strive for it. The concern that I have is the over-reliance on that passion and the belief that any motive other than passion is somehow inferior. And that is definitely not the case. When it comes to your neurological system and the release of particular neurotransmitters, your brain couldn't care less how that neurological system is activated as long as it is. So in Betsy's particular case, you obviously had a very good relationship with your husband, and that stimulation was disappearing because of his medical condition and, of course, as a result of his eventual demise. So you had to go through this transitory period to find, and I don't want to say a replacement, but an alternative from how your brain was rewarded when he was alive and he was healthy and he was fully functioning to when he was not. Because when we're in a deficit state, whether that be, and hunger is a deficit state, thirst is a deficit state, and changing motivation or lack of motivation is a deficit state. And if you remember back to your high school biology course, homeostasis is where your body likes balance, and that applies to the brain too when it comes to motivation. If we're excited all the time, we get burnt out. If we're apathetic all the time, we get depressed. So we need some moderation of our motivation, just like if you overeat, it's not good for you. If you don't eat enough, it's not good for you. So we want to find that sweet spot for a lot of our biological systems, as well as for contentment and motivation in our brain. So I'm not a clinical psychologist. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to, put Betsy on the couch here and give you a psychoanalysis. But I think what you described was you went through a transition and you found a replacement, and that doesn't say why you needed that passion. That's a whole another question we might want to pursue. But I get the impression that you wanted people to profit from your experience and what you went through, and to share your frustrations with the intent of helping other individuals try to be more prepared and know what to do if they encountered a similar situation, and you get gratification from that. Now, is that that the ultimate motive? I don't know, maybe not, but that starts getting to be very personal. But typically, people that like to help others may not have had the opportunity to do it at other times in their life, to show that they're really capable of solving other people's problems and showing their empathy. So many times that type of motive can really be a strategy to enhance one's own impressions of themselves, or what we call in psychology people's self-worth, and instilling self-worth and feeling good about ourselves and how we think we're perceived by people around us and the world in general can be a very, very powerful motive for some people. So it's probably more complex than a radio show.
Thank you. That's interesting, because I'll tell you what, Dr. Hoffman, if someone would have said to me 7 years ago, Betsy, you would be interviewing people, I would have said, no, I would not. I can't do that.
Well, I always tell I tell that to my students, and I can fully relate to. I remember sitting in my master's degree class many, many years ago, and I'm sitting there in my first statistics class, and the professor's up in front of the room, and this was in the days before we had software programs where you could just dump numbers into a program and get a solution. And she's going through this whole routine about how to calculate standard deviation. If anybody knows what that is, doesn't matter. But she's up there for a half an hour with all these formulas and all this stuff written writing on the board. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, who in their right mind would ever want to do this for a living? And then, 20 years later, I was doing the same thing. So, you just don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, that is true, Dr. Hoffman. That is so true, because I didn't even know what a podcast was like 8 years ago.
Right.
I mean, I didn't even know, but I do. I had this passion that because I want people to know what's out there to help them, which I wish I knew when I was caregiving. And I've always, been a caregiver. I worked as a nurse. And I was, yes.
It really is. And, one thing that we haven't discussed yet, and a major theme of the book is a lot of the ways that we go about the world are pretty much predetermined by our genetic profile and the cultures we've been exposed to and the experiences we've had. So you're just taking kind of the next step. And the fact that you have gotten into things that you never expected really talks to the fact that curiosity and learning new things are also a major category of personal rewards. And although we don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details, learning new things activates the same reward pathway in the brain as getting a bonus check or earning money or a very satisfying social relationship. So the reward and the satisfaction of intellectual curiosity in your brain's mind is the same thing. So once again, it's the paradox of passion that you say you're passionate about it, and what that passion really translates into is not only are you satisfying some of those biological predetermined needs that probably you come from a long line of ancestors that were involved in helping others along the way. We don't know. Your genetic code goes back over 500 years, and you can see why certain people are willing to take risks, and other people are very conservative, and some people like to protect what they have, and other people are jumping out of airplanes because they have a whole different view of life. And genetically, we can trace that all back hundreds and hundreds of years and see some similar patterns. So you're expressing the same type of need kind of in a different way, and the fact that you're learning new things is neurologically rewarding to you.
Yes, that's so interesting, because people would ask me, Betsy, how do you handle your grieving and doing what you're doing? And people would, and I also was running a support group. I also have a support group on Facebook, and I started this show while Matt was near the end of his life, and people said, "Well, how can you do all that?" But it gave me a what do they call it? It gave me a distraction, Dr. Hoffman.
Well,
from
I
Matt
understand. Yeah.
Dying. Yes, and afterwards it gave me a purpose. It gave me a purpose to keep my mind busy, and it was a way for me to honor Matt.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, because a lot of people face issues that seem to be put them at wit's end, and they don't know how to respond to it. And a lot of that happens in situations where we're grieving or we have a tremendous loss. It may not be of a person. It could be, our existence, our job goes away, or our kids move away, and we're in this state where we have one of two choices. And I'm gratified to hear that you did what you did, because the two choices are usually one we can ruminate and we can focus on the emotion, or we can use that event to continue to grow who we are. And so what Betsy did and what Dr. Hoffman did, because I was in a similar situation, it's like finding the silver lining in a cloud. And I don't like to talk in cliches, but every single situation has the opportunity to provide benefits both to the individual as well as to the people around the individual. So Betsy could have ruminated and grieved for months and years, or she could have turned that situation into something very positive, like the things that you're doing subsequent to your husband's death. And unfortunately, I can relate to this as well, because my son passed away when he was 31. And
I'm so sorry.
I was, of course, devastated, but I began to think, okay, how am I going to deal with this? And it really changed who I was as an individual, just like the passing of your husband did to you. And in my case, I embraced a lot of the qualities, his positive qualities I didn't have. And I started to think about those more. And when I did, I realized that the strategies I was using needed to be known by other people. So I wrote a book called Hack Your Motivation, which is a book that's been available on Amazon for the last 10 years, and people are still buying it. But it's filled with strategies on how to deal with some of the things we've discussed today. And so, this may be inappropriate for me to say this, but I can say it on my part. If my son hadn't passed away, I don't think I would have wrote that book. And if your husband was still alive, you probably wouldn't be doing podcasts and helping other people. So
that's true.
Even though
I understand.
These situations are absolutely horrible and the worst times in our lives, but they can still be a catalyst, a motivation for us to embrace the situation and do something that not only helps other people, but it helps ourselves. And obviously the devotion of effort and energy on something other than the grief process gets you through it. And it really does. And in the best cases, it produces things like you've done over the years and all the people you've spoken to and shared that information with others. So you can make a really bad situation something that you didn't really expect to happen and something that helps others.
That is true. And I'm sorry about your son, Dr. Hoffman, and thank you for sharing that. That's very personal, and that helps a lot of people because, people are grieving, and, that could be a whole other show we could do, but, they think that, what's wrong with me? Why am I still feeling this way? And the thing is, you'll always love and miss your loved one, unless, of course, you didn't like the person. But, you'll always miss them. Their physical presence, you miss them. And that's normal.
Don't get me wrong. The grieving doesn't stop. It just
right,
kind of
exactly.
Lingers in the background, and you say to yourself, and this is a strategy that I talk about in all my books, is you kind of reformulating. You say to yourself, I'm doing this because of the situation. The situation is the spark that allows me to become more creative, or to become more informative, or to become more friendly, or to become a better person. And it helps subdue the grief. But I'm not a grief counselor either. I'm just sharing my personal experience, but I write about these types of strategies in the new book, Paradox of Passion, but also in my other 2 books, actually. But a lot of people, Betsy, people don't know these strategies.
That's true.
And that's part of the problem. They just you don't know what you don't know. and quite frankly, when I write some of my books, and I probably shouldn't say this on the air, this is my big secret, but the author learns more when they write the book than anybody else.
Well, all that thinking and research that you have to do. I'm curious, how did you go from a corporate to being a psychologist, doing what you're doing, getting interested in that field?
Well, I work in human resources and organizational development. I work in a lot of large companies as well as my own consulting business for about 10 years. And the backbone of any human resources or organizational consultant is helping others maximize their performance. If you really think about it, and this applies to anyone in a leadership role, and I was always in a leadership role, your success is based upon what other people accomplish and your ability to lead them in the right direction and give them the freedom and autonomy to do their jobs and create the best circumstances possible. In other words, you're teaching those individuals that support you to learn and develop their own skills. So the development theme and the motivation theme that goes in, you're always motivating people in leadership roles and in human resources. You know, if somebody's having a performance problem, you want to motivate them to try harder. If the organization is trying to figure out their strategy, you have to help them consider various different ways and the pluses and minuses. So the same theme that I experienced in human resources and organizational development applies to being a motivational psychologist, and that's what I am, because I teach people the same skills that I used to, only now I know the research-based approaches because I've done the research and I've published a lot of scholarly articles that nobody listening would probably want to read because they're all too complicated. So it's really the same thing, and I still base my individual effectiveness on the ability to help others and provide them create the learning experience and the optimal learning conditions to help them be their best selves. So that hasn't changed. But when you get a PhD in educational psychology, you just know more than you do from the day-to-day experience. And, I'll never forget my second week in class after working in the top companies for 22 years all around the world. And I'm sitting in class, and my second class that I took at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and I said, you know what, I've learned more in the last 2 weeks than I learned in the last 22 years. Because a lot of people in organizations just rely on intuition, and they call it gut feeling, and they don't make decisions based on evidence a lot of times. And I began to understand why many organizations falter because they're operating with bad information sometimes. So I don't think anything has really changed. Except the lifestyle of a professor at a Research One university, which is a great gig if you can get it.
Well, your students are very fortunate to have you as their professor because I probably could listen to you talk all day. You are very informative and easy to listen to and easy to talk to. How do you get your students, Duaco, to get motivated? How does a parent get their children motivated to clean their room or to improve their grades. Or a lot of wives might ask, how do they get their husbands motivated to do some household chores?
Well, it's funny. Those are three different categories, but the answer is pretty much the same. And unfortunately, what usually happens is when you say, how do you motivate them? First of all, you really can't motivate someone else. They need to want to change. So, that's the first thing. But you can do two things. You can act as a role model, and you can use certain strategies. And the number one strategy is to get rid of the mandates. It's a lot of times we say, well, I want you to do this, or you need to do this because of, whatever you say the reason is. But that does one thing, or does actually two things. First, it creates a defensive reaction, and people respond emotionally because they feel coerced and manipulated, and nobody likes to feel coerced and manipulated. So what do? You have to try to understand what's important to the other person, otherwise known as drilling down to their core self-beliefs. So, for example, with your kids, why should they clean their room? It's not important to them to clean their room, but there probably are situations where a child would want their room clean so they could do certain activities, or, they might be having friends over and wanted to impress them, or there are any number of potential motives why a child wouldn't want to clean the room, but the most likely one is the fact that they're being told. So, being an advocate that they're not going to have the passion to clean the room, so the person suggesting that they should needs to figure out what they value and what is important to them, and to build that into the whole process of suggesting that cleaning their room would be advantageous based upon what they think and what they value and what they desire. So a lot of times, and this almost happens universally, we approach situations like the ones you described from our own perspective. But who cares about that? Not the person hearing you or receiving the request most of the time. But what we don't want is compliance. That's not what we want. We want enthusiastic endorsement of the request. It's like you're at work. You can get people at work, if you're a manager or a leader, you can get them to do things. But wouldn't you like to get them to do things on their own without being asked?
Right.
So a lot of times, in psychology we call, and in teaching we call it autonomy supportive teaching strategies, where we create a positive environment for people. We take stress out of the picture. We don't let people feel coerced or manipulated. We give them the opportunity to make decisions about how they will fulfill the request. Maybe not necessarily what, and this doesn't mean conceding to whatever whims a child or spouse or a worker has, but creating boundaries, and then within those boundaries say, hey, you can go about this the way you want. But we have to ensure psychological safety. If not, people are defensive, and they're not focusing on the task at hand. They're focusing on, well, what is she going to think about me if I do this? Or how is this going to make me feel? Or what are my emotional costs? So we want to create a positive situation and remove that emotional stress. And there are plenty of others, and these are in Paradox of Passion, because I have a whole section on persuasion and how to persuade others based upon how our brain works. And a lot of our persuasion strategies, and that's what you're talking about is persuasion. But a lot of the go-to persuasion strategies operate in conflict with how our brain works. Mm-hmm. For example, if you say to someone, if you don't do this, something else is going to happen. Like if you don't stop smoking, you're going to die. Or if you don't listen to me, you're going to be punished. Or if husband and wife situation, if you don't fix the broken fan in the kitchen, you're not getting it next weekend. Those three examples induce a defensive reaction in the emotional part of the brain and kill effective reasoning and logic. So how we craft a request makes a big difference as well because of how the brain reacts to certain patterns that promote defensiveness and emotionality. So it's also very complex, and obviously not knowing a particular situation and the players involved and the circumstances and the history, it's really hard to give a precise answer. But I can assure you these are the kind of topics where motivation obviously has a key influence, and where knowledge of particular strategies that align with our neurological system will assist in meeting individual objectives.
There's a lot now about neuroscience that has to do with why we do the things we do and rewiring our brains and our thought processes, which I find fascinating.
Well, it's definitely a thing. It does take, I think what's happening, the concept of rewiring, sometimes called neuroplasticity, is getting a lot of press, and it's starting to, I see things like go and get your dopamine patch, or chew this, dopamine lozenge, and rewire your brain. So it's starting to get into the danger category. Mm-hmm. But we can create different patterns of behavior by using different strategies. A lot of them take a lot of perseverance, and sometimes we have to abstain from certain behaviors for a particular period of time so we can reset. But we can change habitual patterns, even those that are highly influenced by genetic expression, otherwise known as our heredity and our ancestors. So, yes, we can absolutely change our neurological makeup. I don't want to offer false promises like we hear in some of the media. You're not going to change your personality, but right. you can change habitual patterns by sort of like replacing. It's like just like when your favorite shirt wears out and you got to go shopping again. You have to look around for a while and find a suitable replacement. And it may be a different color, and it may be a different style, but eventually the new shirt can become your favorite again. And a lot of it is based on repetition, because if you think about how we are as individuals and what things become important to us and where we devote our time and effort, there's a lot of repetition. So if you want to make that transition, you have to really take steps to, number one, be aware of the repetition, and number two, use some particular strategies to kind of redirect your effort and your energy.
Dr. Bobby Hoffman, I was so delighted to talk to you today. I really enjoyed talking to you. You are awesome. where can people purchase your wonderful book? And I am going to read it. The Paradox of Passion, How Rewards Covertly Control Motivation. Where can people purchase?
Well, it's the first thing I suggest, and I have three suggestions here. Number one, my website, paradoxofpassion.com, and that's all one word, paradoxofpassion.com, has all kinds of information, including a free audio chapter of recording of chapter 1, and all kinds of information about the book. But of course, it's available on Amazon and all major internet retailers throughout the world. So that's an easy go-to place is Amazon.com, and you can either search on the book titles or just Dr. Bobby Hoffman, author. I have an author page. But I also, you mentioned earlier in my intro, I've written over 100 articles that deconstruct a lot of the topics that we talk about into plain, easy-to-understand language. No scientific, nothing overly academic. It's all based on research. But on psychologytoday.com, you can read, I think I'm up to like 108 articles for free. And you just go on Psychology Today, and you can either search on the Motivate blog or my name, and there's a lot of stuff there. So I recommend that people do that. And when you start reading those articles, they're all based upon my books. So if you like that kind of content, then you can go to the website or to Amazon if you want to spend some money. And quite frankly, if you know anybody in your life that is struggling with his personal issues of motivation, books like The Paradox of Passion, and especially Hack Your Motivation. I love Hack Your Motivation because it's got pictures and it's funny and it's easy to read. My students love it. That's just a great book for people that are struggling with motivation and really don't know how to get out of the self-doubt and the anxiety that they might have.
Well, that sounds awesome. I'm going to check out your blog, Motivate on Psychology Today. I'm definitely going to be looking into that. And people can connect with you, Dr. Hoffman, on your website?
They certainly can, and they can write to me at hackyourmotivation@gmail.com. I respond to everybody's email. You might not like the response, but I'll respond anyway. That's hackyourmotivation@gmail.com. And Betsy, you have been a delight. I could probably spend a couple of days talking to you, let alone hours. So if you ever want to do it again, you know where to find me.
Oh, definitely. I'm going to have to take the time to read your book sometime in the spring. But I really wanted to read it because when I received the information from Lissa, I said, "Oh, I got to have that book," and and it came Wednesday. I missed my life is crazy at the moment, and I said, "Oh, I'm not going to get a chance. It's impossible to read it by Monday, but I definitely would love to read it. I would love to have you on again. You were a wonderful, delightful guest to chat with, and I really enjoyed talking to you as well. And so I thank you again for writing your book and doing all that you do, educating our younger generation. They are so fortunate. So thank you so much. And all the information about Dr. Bobby Hoffman will be in the blog that Jeannie White, who is the station manager, she writes the blog, produces the show. And I want to thank Lillian Caldwell, CEO of Passion World Talk Radio Network, who makes this all possible. And I want to thank you, the listeners. Please share the show to help other people. And it sounds like a great book. I can't wait to read it. The Paradox of Passion, How Rewards Covertly Control Motivation by Dr. Bobby Hoffman. Go on his website. Notes will be in the blog. And you can follow me on Facebook, Betsy E. Wurzel, W-R-Z-E-L. And I am on Chatting with Betsy. It's for free to subscribe to on Amazon Music, Spotify, Spreaker, just to name a few. And I would appreciate it if you would tell people about Chatting with Betsy, because I want to help as many people as possible. I know people are struggling, and I have great guests, experts on many different fields, and I just want to help people. That's what I'm here for. And as I always say at the end of my show, in a world where you can be anything, please be kind and shine your light bright, because we need it now more than ever before. This is Betsy Wurzel, your host of Chatting with Betsy on Patrick Real Talk Radio Network, a subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC. Bye-bye now.